pretty good. The CJS is unequivocally a tool of white supremacy. The law is not colorblind. Prisons are a machine for racist violence. Level 12. The starving introduced due to drastic expansion of what's considered criminal conduct. Radically disproportionate imprisonment rate dates back to the 13th Amendment. As a system for subordination for free blacks. This racialized construction of crime is deeply ingrained in America's criminal legal system. Remains a driving force behind imprisonment. Law and order policies invoke a racist imagery linking criminals with black conduct. Queer individuals, especially those of color, face extreme discrimination targeting from the law. Level 2. Queer transgender people, especially of color, experience continued institutionalization of severe violence within the legal system. Queer violence lives are criminalized through social construction of categories of crime which dictate heteronormative expressions are acceptable white, deep identities are criminal. Queer people are arrested at alarming rate. Laws such as lewd conduct, public indecency, and loitering. The law is an indeterminate myth created by elites and doesn't carry no relevance. 1295. Any result can be derived from pre-existing legal doctrine. Laws are indeterminate and incapable of neutral interpretation. When judges decide cases, they choose law, legal principles to determine particular outcomes. Section 40. The benefit of the rule of law. Think slavery in republic. Decade. All men were equal. Or the law supports segregation. Even the 14th Amendment. The rule of law corrected some of the logical stuff and the more malleability of its virtue. The law, rule of law had in the first instance justified the whole. The rule of law is a myth and not applicable to African Americans, blacks, and other minorities lack the political class to have equal say. The law thus does not protect society's interests, but merely that of those in power. Butler 2. Bible democracy assumes that group has power to limit influence legislation. Blacks have low economic status and are object to prejudice and makes them difficult to form coalitions of action able to achieve substantial progress through electoral politics. Legislative bodies persistently disadvantage a minority and encompass a conscious exclusion of prejudiced majority are not compelled to identify its interests with those of a minority. A homogeneous majority transforms a majority rule into majority tyranny. Part 2 is framing. You can't separate the resolution of our history. Our ethics must be informed in injustice of empirical institutions. Abstracting away makes real solutions of pressure impossible. Career 14. Despite the pronouncement of data pointing to real consequences, discussion sees sociological realities, conquest, and one ideal theory over another. Porn styles in LD is a conceptual task between actual problems, how we brain travels theoretically. This gap threatens any real world discussion about the concrete nature of oppression. We cannot suggest social problems or constantly emerging and the effects of your brains are coalesceable within a frame. And considering only the consequences of actions coalescing, because stress can all actions to general harms. We should discuss individual roles and injustice better than understanding decision making at a material level. Addressing injustice means every act of resistance is important. We must refuse to be complicit in injustice. Beverly Hughes at 89. Shouldn't use assume based on cost will change behavior. One is a duty of function to avoid violating rights, but to support that moral order. In this moral community, people reinforce moral behavior, raise the overall level of morality. When this moral order disintegrate, there'd be more violence to people's rights. Resisting instant oppression is key because the right thing to do. Intervening actions see after spirally hypothetical to impact scenarios. Go 93. Respect for persons is an obligation so fundamental it can't be overridden, even to prevent evil consequences. When there's a causal connection between some action and harm, moral responsibilities remove this, intervene some other action who knows intend to reduce this. Intervening action is more direct cause. MLK was repeatedly told he was morally responsible for riots and sued of his king's opponents who were responsible because their intervention operated as sufficient condition. Thus the standard is resisting oppression and using a starting point of impartial equality or ideal theory fails since it ignores the structural barriers that naturally improves the ability to access that starting point in Mills 09. How can ideal without a past serve to correct for a long history of white supremacy? Ideal theory enables you to say when society is unjust, but doesn't say what to do if you find yourself in an unjust society you want to correct that. Ideal theory requires an unattainable target that will cross to roll back and start over. It's a with a little or no practical worth. What is requires an ideal that starts from reality and seeks some means of correcting your role as an educator mandates fighting against a genocidal prison system. Rodriguez 10. Teachers and students are part of the prison's regime production. Its abolition through teaching is a liberatory common sense. The abolition teacher must be willing to talk about the difficult position of political leadership in the classroom. Any teacher tests students to enable an abolitionist position unless the teacher embodies that same desire. Reproducing the prevented systematic violence of the U.S. nation-building project, teachers are able to betray the genocide movement, and a model of survival tactics is best to avoid cooperation from the state and creates resistance. Minos 99. That attempt to reject dominant ideology and rebel against her would be counter-determination. Such system insults validates dominant ideology. Disidentification works on against the dominant ideology. Instead, attempting to break through inescapable fear, transform cultural logic within labor into an act of permanent social structural change with the valuing of local resistance. Part 3 is resistance. In the United States criminal justice system, jury nullification ought to be used in face of perceived injustice. To vote guilty when one sees the laws unjust to be complicit in the system of oppression, being merely a fact finder for the laws to cede to government. So juries need to nullify to check against injustice. Z08. A potential juror is presented with two options. You choose to abdicate, just give an endorsement to one who has no qualms about the morality of the law. The other option is to nullify. If state is wrong, if the law and acts are wrong, then participating in the system which implements them is also wrong. A jury willing to apply the state laws without regard to their morality is biased in favor of the state. Determining the facts without knowing this, it can lead to one outcome, and to make oneself a part of the conclusion. Jury nullification serves as a tool to fight back against queer criminalization. Commitment 15. Jury nullification protects harassed conscience rather than helping the state cage human beings. So separate the criminal punishment system to fight against structural violence. Protest the policing of deviant sexual identities. When queer, homeless people are on trial for survival crimes, vote not guilty. When queer and trans people are charged with homicide for defending themselves from hate crimes, vote not guilty. The jury is where people can disrupt state violence. Jury nullification serves as a part of a larger movement with revolutionary potential. It's not a reform or legalization of criminal justice and miraculous science against it. Furlough 15. Jury nullification is not about reforming the criminal justice and jurors can upset the whole racist class of apple cart. Ordinary citizens can refuse to be part of the prison system. Jury nullification does reform law so much as it explodes it from within. Not the legislator. Juries will be the pitchforks and torches. The riot police can't stop you. You want to make Black Lives Matter, put it in the hands of subversive jurors, take away the authority of the police state by denying them guilty verdicts. See wars over if you wanted to. People with truly bad intentions will quit with or without nullification. Rodney King, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, or others prove it. Increased nullification is good either way. Butler 95. Often white people do nullify white jurors. Acquitted police officers who beat up Rodney King. There's no reason why my approach should cause white jurors to acquit white defendants any more frequently. White jurors would be choosing to opt out to be a CJS system for practical political reasons, purposes that would be excellent. Waiting for the system to reform itself is a gas for its supremacy. Only those privileged enough to never experience the tangible effects of racism can make this claim. Collins 08. 09. The percentage of black men in jail reflects disparate impacts. Prison is a breeding ground for recidivism, rape, and AIDS. Wait has always almost meant never. It's easy for you who never felt singing kids segregation to say wait when you have seen policemen kill your black brothers and sisters. You will find it difficult to wait. The majority of African American men will be in prison. Drain is key to people having an equal voice in society. Delaware 13. Nullification advocates argue with the need to resistance government oppression people with ridiculous laws. Criminal laws with people occupation and abstract, but revoltingly when they apply concretely. Neighbors laws of it under the vast majority untethered away from popular sovereignty. The humility of this democratic law, but people back when such laws are being applied to particular defendants. And part 4 is the interview. First, advocates RBIs. They have like Sankey's ability collapse when the layer, so Afghan's ability collapse when the layer. I've seen more speed because time crunch rebuttal, so Afghan's RBIs to engage the debate at LB. Reciprocity only they can read T solely because only half is T burden, so the Afghan will be respond to T. They need the RBI to compensate for the negs. You can have the balance. See, the one error is too short to read theory compared to the neg, so the Afghans each other to be reciprocal rather than adding more unreciprocal avenues. Drop the rest of the interview.
Everybody ready?
Yeah, let me just get my water in my bag. Okay, yeah, I'm good.
Okay, so what exactly is your advocacy?
So the advocacy is just drain nullification in the face of perceived injustice.
Okay, so you read a piece of evidence that talks about it's not about reforming, it's about resisting it and explodes it from within. How does it do this?
Okay, so the Varela 15 evidence stipulates that juries are literally become the independent people who destroy the state from within. So it's this motive like, well, you wouldn't say anarchist thought necessarily, but revolutionary thought. There's a part of the system that the system
Where does your
cannot
evidence indicate that
physically
it's
control.
actually going to explode?
As the Varela 15 evidence.
Your Varela 15's evidence says that jury nullification doesn't reform law so much as explode it, and then the unhighlighted part says it has the potential for radical change, it will be pitchforks of the riot, and the police can't stop. Where is it that says that it actually will destroy the criminal justice system, or is this all hypothetical?
Well, first off, the Goodman 15 evidence stipulates that right now jury nullification serves as a tool to fight back against things like queer criminalization. So it's
okay,
doing
cool.
things
You have
now.
a bunch of cards that say it fights back. I want to know when it actually destroys the system.
So this isn't some sort of question of brink, right? It's not like, oh, well, once we reach this amount of resistance, we destroy the entire system. It's a question of how we can make the system better. This is a methodology debate, not some sort of brink-like impact scenario.
Okay, cool. So what does it mean to, like, how do you draw the intersections between, like, black and queer identity?
What do you mean?
Like, how does the affirmative, like, interpret those identities?
I don't know what that question means.
Like,
how
do you use an
draw the
intersectional
intersections?
approach, or, like, what?
No, the approach is just that we ameliorate the conditions of both people. That queer and trans people are given fairer say and given more legal rights in the world of the affirmative.
Okay, cool. Then, you say
It's
that...
not a question of viewing identity, it's who we can actually help.
Okay, so wait, why is it not a question of viewing identity?
Because the affirmative says if you identify as trans, if you identify as queer, if these laws are affecting you, then you should have the right to have legal recourse, right? If you are a queer trans youth who is being tried for a crime or a survival crime, right, that law should be nullified.
Okay.
Right? I don't define who is queer, who is trans. It's just that these things are happening right now in the status quo and we need to resolve them.
Okay, cool. But there's definitely a material conception of what it means to be, like, queer and trans, right?
Well, I don't impose any conception. It's a conception of, like, what the laws are trying people for.
Okay, cool. Then, how can we understand violence materially?
Well, violence is material. It's based
Why?
on physical pain. Like, the criminal justice system locks people up, takes away their rights, takes away their ability to
Why
live.
is that entirely physical?
Well, it's probably not entirely physical. There might be some position of ontology in which the criminal justice system regulates you to.
Okay. And you say the law is an indeterminate myth, then why should we use it?
We shouldn't. That's the thesis
Isn't
of
jury
UC.
nullification a use of the law?
No, it's a subversion of the law.
Okay.
It's literally nullifying the law. Couldn't be any farther away from using the law.
Okay, no further questions.
how many seconds?
45.
Okay. Can you flash the NC?
It's all on paper. All on 15.
Oh, it's all on paper.
45.
One off case.
Can you, like, hand me the sheets or something?
Mm-hmm. Of course. It's gonna be some deja vu. Everybody ready?
Yep.
The affirmative use of autonomy identity politics serves to place the queer within the limits of material normative. Only the affirmation of feeling can allow us to affirm the queer as non-normative. We must look outside the normative structure of humanity and truly open up possibilities of queerness. This is especially true when he says that we should use the idea of individuals instead of intensities. Colework 09. The queer is negative defined as difference of those conditioned recognition normative both enable preclude autonomy mistaken. We think of non-existence of failure. We need to think of non-being as positive. Each existing actualized individual is the actualization of non-being the queer self. Might be better thought of a counter-actualization of the material repetition that make up man the queer self would be repeat the problems that compose the self. The counter-actualization of the present by drawing upon the pure past the question of birth. Whereas Millard begins with the subject loses theory. We go beyond the composed self. The problem with the affects and tendencies with the organized condition theory. We go require going on in the organism. We long work concerned with identity. Who we are, we remain constituent with matter and live time. We intensely, we need to live without pure form and time different intensities. This requires a radical break from identity politics. Only by living in intensities beyond the human can we live in ethically. Thus, queer politics would involve the affirmation of the pre-personal and the exclusion of the queer. Place the queer as a sexually deviant other that is removed from citizenship and personhood. This gives way to the state's even more heinous method of simulation through homo-nationalism. The neoliberal method of pacifying queer bodies through melding them into the fold of nationalism. This demobilizes queer politics and fortifies heteronormative national structure of the American legal system through the social management of queer bodies. 407. Sexual deviancy is linked to the process of coordinating terrorist bodies, signaling and enforcing patriotism. The emasculated terrorist not merely another barometer of abnormality involved in the disciplinary apparatus. September 11th feels like consolidation, reflecting radicalization, where members of the group are identified as terrorists, disidentified citizens. Disidentification is a process of sexualization as well as radicalization. The terrorist figure must appear and probably radicalized outside the norms of multiculturalism and personally sexualized in order to materialize the terrorist in the first place. The war terrorism related some queer to U.S. national citizenship with the facial terrible domain is homo-nationalism, homonormativity, a new neoliberal sexual politics, the possibility to demoralize gay constituency, privatize, demoralize gay culture, anchored in domestic consumption. We see the fortification of normative heterosexual copying, the propagation of sexuality, resistant heteronormativity, these are proliferating sexualities, complicate the economy's implication of casting nations, solely supportive of productive of heteronormativity, always repressive homosexuality. The terrorist one discourse tactically derogates the nation's gays and queers from radical sexual others for grinding homonationalism in the first bodies, rearranging heterosexuality. The norm also exists and domestic heterosexual bodies provide ammunition to reinforce nationalist projects. Therefore, the alternative is reflection upon the unintelligibility of the queer suicide bomber. The United States labeling of queer bodies and deviants others as terrorists necessitates double strategy reflecting upon Lucius taken on code. The terrorist, the image of the suicide bomber resonates with a figure of radical non-normativity, which leaves the question of why, who, and up, and everything else up to answer. The suicide bomber is a movement in the body that liberates economies and collapses life, death, self, and other categories of incomprehensible act. This also allows a movement from static identity to fluid identity, opening understanding space and intensity, feeling and understandability that can enable queer to exist as an unknowable difference. 407. Why is this suicide bomber not talked about that being condemned first? When I desire here to momentarily suspend this element of combining analysis of these representational states with the reading of force of affect of the body of matter, machine body together to metal and flesh and cells, and the inorganic and inorganic death are not the self nor the other, but both simultaneously, perhaps more accurately, death seems the really silent, altogether self-annihilation, access of self-preservation and preservation, symbolic self-enabled in the highest cultural capital of martyrdom. Suicide bombers are a sign of life, normally from violent condition of life, impossibility of making alive this body, force of reconciliation of opposites, their inevitable collapse of creation, habitation of contradiction, the candidate for martyrdom to transform his or body into a mass highly soon to be detonated weapon concealed part of the body. The body is not simply concealed, what the body transformed into a weapon, not a metaphorical sense of truly ballistic and temporal narratives of progression are upturned as death and becoming fused into one as one body dies, one body becomes a massive weapon. The suicide bomber cut it, suicide bomber. The role of the ballot is to vote for who best performatively, methodologically engaged in queer unintelligibility. The modern world consists of making all things encodable and understandable, causing homogenization which destroys difference, produces meaninglessness. Yet the nature of metaphors that exposes itself to those who experience it and gains ambiguity as to how this relationship is constant. The negatives retaining a symbolic metaphor is a poetic affirmation akin to the unknowability of suicide bomber destruction that allows to retain possibility. Fernando 10. Poetry is exposing itself to possibility of rationality, relationality while maintaining the ambiguity of the exact nature of the possibility metaphor is disappearing. This is due to everything is like everything else. No one can be distinguished between any longer this lack that results in disappearing into each other. The metaphor that doesn't allow the names of singular one another to equate with another, prevents them from disappearing into other things. By momentarily disturbing, consider the suicide bomber the slightest one who retains their mind as an impossibility. One who's willing to consider this possibility, never resisting the finality. All one can do at this point is pose the question: the suicide bomber is not a remainder of these times with the instant answers and our effective turn of the movie's body's intensity that pursues the depth materiality and the structure of the grids of intelligibility used to exclude and separate bodies needs outside the intelligible. 407. No matter the intersectional methods of our subjectivity, these formulations still limit us. Affect is biological phenomena, only bodily matter matters, while escape for it remains outside of the discursively structured the commodity forms of feeling affect. Escapes our attention to a constant representational realm. Affect is synthetic, implying a participation in the sense of each other. They no longer escape the universe. We got potential there. Autonomy is the autonomy of affect. Moving on to the case, starting at the very top, the entirety of the case turns the entirety of his offense. His offense that the criminal justice system is used to white supremacy and queer face extreme and discriminalization. If we're running a risk of a link, then there's no reason you should vote affirm. I'll do mostly analysis on the framing issue, then go to the framing. His first career evidence indicates you not separate religions from a history. I agree, but it's not a question of history as such, but a question of history. Now we understand things that are unintelligible to history. For example, the idea of queer history is always framed in a certain way of heteronormativity, but you cannot understand that absent idea of something that is abstractual, because at this point, abstraction is the only thing left of the queer body. He sets consequence individuals' roles are needed at the material level. We agree, but I don't think you do it well enough. The idea of the material level is what we need to look at, but it's a question of the affectual level that exists there, not the individuals. You look at material, something that is not abstract. Our argument is that material is always abstract, especially for the queer individuals. To mean that your individual roles are something you do not actually uphold. Instead, we should move past the human being into something that is actually effectual, which is the material level as such, instead of the one which you impress. This, he says resisting oppression. He says the Mill's evidence. One, queerness is irrational. You cannot ground it in material understandings. The idea of queerness is completely irrational. Humanist articulation, their found rationality and reason cannot account for the irrational nature of queer violence that society is built upon. This is especially true in the context of the affirmative solution can only be found outside the normal concepts of life and death. Warren 13. The problematic invites us to consider the functionality of violence and the inequality of the human. Humanist interest to address these violations. I agree, rights. One cannot rely on rational interest to resolve an irrational dilemma, especially when the interest depend on the irrationality to sustain them. Horror of overkill is not so much spectacular violence that the solution or correction to this problem would have to reside outside the normative lines, times of life and death, and outside reason itself. Overkill is the violence that sustains society without an illiberal democracy, and an institution would cease to exist. Then, moving on to this role of judge argument, the role of the judge is to resist metaphysical structures of heteronormativity. You should exist on the level of affect, and you should prefer that for all the reasons of the 1 and C. Then, on the Moon is 99 evidence, he says survival tactics. He gives no reason why you specifically are survival tactics, especially the survival tactics of the 1 and C are not something that are productive for the bodies that exist, but instead productive for the individuals that are ruling upon them. We say that we should take a more personal approach, which is that of the 1 and C. Then, on the resistance arguments. Sorry, and Zay. The first one, vote guilty is a recession to government. To vote guilty is to be complicit with the system of violence. The criminal justice system never views the trans people as people. Legal or political separate person who exclude black and queer bodies and instills white heteronormative conceptions of humanity. Wahili 14. We need an alternative legal separate person that dominates the focus on the inclusion based on narrow legal framework constrained to anti-discrimination. Not only hinders the eradication of violence against trans people, other vulnerable population, but also creates condition possibility for the continued unequal distribution of life chance. We believe only the notion of personhood of the property that zeroes in compared to only one form of subjugation will expense the others, thus allowing for the continued existence of hierarchical differences. Claiming if a force for inclusion or abusive view from the law itself has been clearly violent endorsement of racialist slavery to continue to be one of the chief instruments in creating and maintaining the racialized assemblage of the world. Counteract the calls for radical politics and articulate an impossible worldview, trans-political existence, articulate assemblage, and moving the ball of the ground upon subjugation. This is especially true in the eternity, the affirmative, whether or not you flee from the state or something like that, you still exist in the assemblage theory, the way in which you exist within the state's apparatus, which means that something you cannot escape. Then, moving on to the Velo 15 evidence. What your evidence does not actually indicate when this will really happen. This is power tag rhetoric. It does nothing to actually say how this will ever actually be implemented. You should hold in this as a solvency advocate. 2. Explosion from within the system is distinct from that of the 1 and C's effective term. You should give me credence on that. There is a distinction between burning the system down from the inside and using interpersonal ideas and using affective term, which means that you should prefer the negative on this question. Then, their action only feeds the system like a Mobius. No, sorry, move on. The affirmative queer suicide bomber will displace the homeland, creates a diaspora that creates a new home for the queer when no other can exist, or this solves the issue of the prison system. We can create a queer assemblage that allows us to exist with this kind of homeland. 407, rather than conceiving a homeland, something that creates the diaspora, more productive to consider the diaspora, something that creates a homeland must be understood as affecting temporal process rather than a place. The diaspora stability can be reworked to further queer habitus of the nation. Queer diaspora retails the diaspora account for the connection between different, sharing a common sexual homeland, shift away from origin for a moment allows the form of diaspora of atheric and cathartic entities, primarily the bodies and traumas that haunt the diaspora, is coherent to sensation affectivities and contingent temporalities, not for identity but assemblage. Okay. 1 second. My computer's about to die. Okay, we're trying to do it. Is there an easy place to plug it in here or not?
There's a plug right there. I can't see any other plugs.
Sorry about that.
Sorry, would you mind putting these pages in order as well?
Yeah. So I'll mark where I stop that clear real quick.
Yeah.
It's all in order. And then I read this. Yeah. So yeah, that's all in order, pretty much.
Okay.
Yep.
So, let's start in the first link. Why does the AF reify identity politics?
Yeah, so the evidence I read is very specific to the idea of relating to individualism, right? The idea of the human subject. Our argument is we should move beyond that.
So first of all, what does it mean to move beyond the human subject?
Yeah, so I think the queer suicide bomber is a good example to explain this. The idea of moving to intensity, the things that exist outside of the human subject in the realm of things we experience.
What exists outside the human subject?
Yeah, so intensities, things like that.
What is intensity?
Yeah, so intensity is, we'd say, the way in which for example, the queer suicide bomber interacts with the environment, things like that, the things that exist outside of the human being.
Why does the environment exist outside of human beings?
Well, I mean, you can make an argument about how, our cognition means that we always look at the world, but I would say that there is probably a realm of feeling or a realm of at least
okay, so why does the affirmative reify any of these identity politics? Why do we have a specific emphasis on, personal
Yeah, so I think that your idea of using jurors specifically is a bad tool, a bad methodology, which I think it indicates. It also is particularly good.
So jurors should disidentify?
I don't really take a stance on what jurors could do. My alt is not in the context of jurors.
So
my argument is that jurors...
What exactly is the alternative?
Yeah, it's to reflect upon the image of the queer suicide bomber.
First of all, what is the queer suicide bomber?
Yeah, so Poir's argument is that the suicide bomber is something that is necessarily queer because of the way in which nationalist projects frame bodies, right? So the terrorist is the frame for abnormality, and that is applied to the idea of the queer.
So what exactly does the alt do?
Yeah, so the alternative is a movement towards affect, which is basically a movement towards like these kind of intensities that exist by
what does that
embodying.
What does that look like?
An affirmation of the suicide bomber.
Okay,
it's like a queer. What
would queer people do?
Yeah, so
in the world of the alternative.
I think the Poir diaspora evidence is good on like what queer people can actually do, right? It's a kind of like disidentification with each other through the mode of like non-static identity.
If in the status quo, a trans youth is being tried for a survival crime and faces 80 years in prison, what does the alt do for that child?
Yeah, so I think the alt creates a productive methodology to resolve the root cause of those kinds of issues.
Wait, why?
Because the kind of understanding of the way in which the nationalist projects uphold those
So
kinds of
everybody
things,
in the nation shifts their view of queer bodies?
Again, I'm never saying that it does that. I think that the queer is something, again, like this is the whole assemblage theory, right? It's like the state space is something that extends beyond like the centralized location of the United States. So the action of a suicide bomber, or the queer suicide bomber within that kind of mode, expands outward.
What does that mean? I want to know how this outward expansion stops that child from going to jail for the rest of their life.
Okay, like in that particular instance...
It would not help?
I'm going to articulate that it could, in that instance, maybe they would end up going to jail. But we think that it creates
better structural
change. It creates better structural change.
You think it creates better structural change?
Yes.
Okay, fine. How do I engage in queer unintelligibility? Like, can I make a perm?
Like, you can make a permutation. I'd make arguments against it, of course. But I think that, like, queer unintelligibility is being able to open spaces for queers that are unintelligible. And
what does it mean for queerness to be unintelligible?
Yeah, queerness to be unintelligible is basically to be, like, unknowable, to understand that, like, queerness exists as something that is, like, indescribable to the, like, political relations.
Okay. 1 minute left. I'll flash you the new cards.
Do you know the order? Just so
Yeah, it's going to be NC or KAC. Okay, cool. It should the files I flash you should be in the same file, but just in the bottom. So just close it and reopen it.
cool. Just 1 second. I don't think it's in here.
Going to the interview. Extent, yeah, sorry. Those are the cards.
Which ones?
Starting, so Curry, the 2 Curry 13 cards and the Massive 14 cards.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Is everybody ready?
Yep.
Alright. So, let's write it down. First start off on the K, overview to the K. Delusion becoming is a parasitic to the black body. It assumes the flexibility that allows you to abandon your identity. The black body continually denied this flexibility. Massive 14. What is fundamentalized subjective capacity and direct proportion to black capacity? The parasitic relationship is the foundation of blackness plus marine epistemology. Necessity of ontological construction of the black body is a slave. They rely on incapacity black subject being maintained. Its own possibilities of white capacity can maintain its own coherence. So imagine the possibility for itself of prime scale we can be seen to lose becoming which we refuse to be shocked by static identity. Becoming is inaccessible to the black body because it requires some independent subjectivity. The capacity of black body compared becoming which maintains so the whiteness can have model of the capacity compared to becoming grants whiteness the potentiality which denies the history of racism. Curry 13. The potentiality of whiteness the more the fiat is to retrieve before witness or it becomes or what actually is where witness morally structured would see determine what it could be. This supports the erroneous view of the white race which includes the reality of white supremacy. Thus the dehumanizes those deemed outside of the system, making their ethics impossible. Curry 13. Racism is outside of ethical deliberation, rationally determined relationship to the human being expanded the either logical base of humanity is the origin, the efforts of conceptualization to the born out of the exclusive morality of the white human against barbarism is the moral product of dehumanization commanding the morality of informing justify their existence. By the calling their evidence from the AC. This is really you'd be damned for the AC because he literally parasite queer bodies from ever actually indulging in this sort of survival mechanism. This is really bad because he, in the entirety of the K, denies the fact that the entirety of the AC denies the fact that queer bodies can ever adopt any of the aesthetic identity. Then they cannot be seen as unintelligible because the white system views them as deliberately intelligible and they can never actually escape. They see it simply abstracting, trying to solve a material condition for oppression. This is even more damning when he says, oh yes, we send kids to jail, but eventually we're able to expand the metrics of unintelligibility and free them from it. This is horrible because he dooms people to an ontological state of existing in prison. He literally traps their identities within the prison system. It says, oh, it's okay, we can solve for it eventually. Go the line by line. First link, the Kohlberg evidence. This essentializes all juries. He doesn't know how anybody on that jury identifies. He simply says, oh, the personal identity is identity politics. I'm saying that juries should be used the same metaphor that destroys the system from the inside or as a literal mechanism. But either way, you can use juries as the abstract metaphor that destroys the system and that subverts the entire idea of the rule of law. That was the thesis of the AC. Second, of the Viral 15 evidence. So the Viral 15 evidence is really good in the second link. It says queers are part of the state, but I'm saying that the queers are using this jury nullification to destroy the state from the inside. That these jurors can be queers who subvert the system and destroy the state with their own anarchic thought. The growth E3 evidence is really good here on the alternative. It says we should reject any instance of the violation of rights, which means if he dooms at least one child to have to live in the criminal justice system, it's a reason why the K is not productive enough. And perm. First perm, do the alt in the affirmative, adopt the mindset of the alt while doing it. Second perm, double mind. Either the alt is strong enough to solve any residual links to the affirmative, or it's not, and therefore it can't overcome any residual links to the status quo. Third perm, have jurors adopt the mindset of the K, and then implement the affirmative policy. Solves back really real obvious because it's a conceptualization of the way you view the system, the absolutely more concrete methodology that actually helps people go to the AC. He's not responding to Curry 14 well enough. He says I respond to a material level, not effectual level. But the criminal justice system is a position of ontology. I'm saying we try to free people from the effectual level of having to exist in the criminal justice system. So turn, you allow trans youth to be simply trapped in the state. That is the Collins own evidence that you, they are trapped in the state, and you simply stand by and say, oh, wait, it's okay, we'll free you eventually, but eventually is literally never in the context of decay, because it shows no direct solvency or reasons why people in the criminal justice system can adopt any form of becoming if they are trapped inside the ontology of the criminality. That is the 11 to 12 card. He's not responding to the Rodriguez 10 evidence is also really good here. He says we have to resist metaphorical heteronormativity, but I'm saying your role of the judge is to adopt a method that actually allows us to resist this. The alt is not good enough. We can do both, but it's a question of which method is actually more productive. He reads a bunch of cards like the Whitley cards that say I doom queers, but the Goodman 15 card is really good here because it says that right now in the Sasco, the AC is a good thing for any queer body or any trans body, and that we're actually freeing kids right now. The alternative is just a metaphor that possibly can create change, but you prefer the method of the alternative, like some specificity of, first of all, how it affects drain nullification, second of all, the fact that it's happening right now. It is a linear, is the amount of free bodies we have in the system. The queer assembly doesn't apply because we already endorse this position. We just actually have a method of solving for it.
So, can you write down the terms or something?
Oh, sure. You want like a piece of paper?
You can just write it on here. I'm not going to put this over again. I was like, first.
Tell me if you can't read my handwriting, because I know this.
It'll be fine. I have the worst handwriting ever.
I will make a conceited effort.
You want me to just read them to you?
Oh, do you have them? I just want to make sure I got them all.
Perm do the F with the mindset of the alternative. Perm double bind. Perm jurors adopt the mindset of decay, then implement the F.
Alright, I think it's
Are we
fine.
in agreement?
Yep.
Yeah, that works. That's fine. Sorry. Alright, here we go. So, it's going to go K, case. No new cards.
Sorry, what did you say?
K, case.
Okay.
And then case. Okay. Are we ready? He's not doing specific link analysis of the work that I did in the 1 and C. His argument that the jurors should be used as actual metaphorical or actual argument, but he does not answer the question that the idea that the assemblage of the state is something you were linking to. The argument is that the state is something that exists in an apparatus, not something that exists as such, but also something that exists within our plane of being. For example, the idea of our mind is necessarily predicated of the state when we exist within the surveillance system and things like that, of the state that exists now. That means the link is especially true with the use of persons and his bodies. That's his second argument, that we should use persons as intensities. Being is also negative, or the Kohlberg evidence indicates the idea of seeing being as something that is positive and a proactive force is something that is bad. You should instead see being as a kind of non-being negativity. That means every individual has a possibility of being non-being, which means that you should affirm that there's a clear distinction here. The Kohlberg evidence, you can extend, uses autonomy and place the queer within the norms of subjectivity. This is particularly true when he says the queer is the understanding of something that exists within the political sphere. He says the queers are using journal nullification to destroy the state from the inside, but that does not answer our argument as to whether or not that is productive, whether or not that is going to be good enough for some individuals. He says that this means that it's happening now, but it does not answer the argument as to whether or not, one, this is productive, or two, whether or not the fact that it's happening now is enough to solve the fact that it will fail later. The Poirot 7 evidence also completely conceded that exclusion turns the affirmative neoliberal pacification of queer politics happens through heteronormativity. This is specifically true when you fold individuals into the fold of nationalism, for example, through the idea of using the state. If I'm winning that you're using the state at all, and there's a risk of link argument here, the argument is that saying that homonationalism or queerness is good within the state context at all is something that is probably bad. The Poirot 7 evidence, he says that rejecting the violation of rights is not productive. Our Whaley evidence, which requires supply from the case I read, indicates that the idea of rights is statistically not accessible to individuals of color or queer individuals, because the idea of rights is something necessarily excludes them. This probably links to his abstraction arguments as well. Rights is not something that can actually help the queer body. You can extend the alternative. He conceded a 100% risk of solving the link. The alternative is the queer suicide bomber. This is not some metaphorical thing, as he's frames it as, but instead it's a metaphorical understanding of the way in which we reflect the nation state of the United States and how it understands bodies. For example, they label bodies as terrorists, but the affirmation of that kind of terror in the terms of queerness is something that is productive and allows a queer body something that can burn down the state from the inside out as a kind of explosion of queerness. They have also considered this as an assemblage theory, which allows us the ability to understand things as intensity, which is, for example, the movement. There are things that exist outside of our realm. He's not making any good arguments as to when the 1AR is why things cannot exist outside of the human mind. For example, the individual that exists within the nature and things like that, the combination of bodies and things like that, and those kind of coexistences are something that are productive, that our alternative indicates is key to solve 100% of the link evidence, which means you give me 100% risk of solving so then the evidence is going to lose him the debate. The modern world makes things encodable through assigning difference and as something that is completely encodable. He concedes the 100% risk of this, which means that the Fernando evidence will turn the entirety of the permutations. The permutation arguments are the argument of encoding the affirmative and the negative as two distinct things and combining them together. Our argument is that it's not as simple as that. It's in fact, it's messy, and even if it's not messy, you're assigning of us those two labels to the permutation is something that is net bad and reason that it produces meaninglessness, which turns any of your arguments. Also, the rule of the ballot is to vote for who best performing methodology engaged in queer intelligibility. We have good reasons as to why this is good. He's conceded the poor evidence. I read under the role of the ballot that indicates the effective term is uniquely necessary to be able to deconstruct bodies. That means there are effective understandings necessary to be able to affect or effectually change these kind of understandings that exist in the affirmative, which means it solves the 100% of case. It also means that there is no way that he can solve back the alternative when he has running risk of links. Then on an overview on all the alts, same place where he probably float Fernando. Not only is Fernando about a reason that he loses, but also all links are disadvantaged. All the permutations by arguments are still in the link. First on the permutation, do the alternative in the mindset of the affirmative. That does not solve any of the argument. The idea that we can do the aff in the mindset of the alternative is not something that solves. The mindset of the alternative is not just the idea of seeing things effectually, but also the understanding of things that are effectually. Your understanding of normative conceptions of the political system cannot solve that issue. Also, he said that permutive mindset, or he says permutation do the all strong enough to solve the residual links. The links are the aff specifically contextualized. The status quo is not enough to trigger the impact because there's a folding in of the idea. For example, gay marriage may be happening now, but the plan of the affirmative completely utilizes the kind of folding queers into the whole national system, which means I'm running a risk of the state. Then the residual links are solved, or it's good enough to solve the residual links because it's specifically the folding in, as per our second piece of poor evidence, is the folding in of the queers to the nation state. That's what you do. Then on the evidence he reads. First, on the Moss evidence, one, there's no good link to why the K is a question of becoming. The K is a question of embodying the queer suicide bomber. She uses the idea of assemblage, but there's no reason that this is necessarily the idea of becoming. The idea of queerness is something that exists as alteric and exists with the assemblage theory. It's not something that instantly indicates becoming, but it says status of queerness is something that is messy too. You ignore messy bodies, which is the reason why you do not accept the fact that there are black queer bodies that cannot exist within your argument, finding a risk of the idea that black queer bodies, in some sense, especially trans bodies, as per O'Healy evidence, are not accepting the political state of the one you see, then you should deny it in the DA to the affirmative. And then on the Curry evidence. His internal link to his third piece of Curry evidence is not very good. He says that the whiteness potentially denies the history of racism, but an argument that we made in the African crossbite here that completely conceded in the 1AR that what is history? One of the arguments we make in the affirmative is that we need to understand history with a particular mode, and the understanding of history that denies the idea of queer black existence is not something we should look to. Then on the AC. Healy does a bunch of generic cross-application. He doesn't actually answer my arguments. He said that Goodman solved the Healy evidence because the AC is the status quo is freeing kids right now. The alternative is a metaphor, but the legal notion of a person to exclude trans bodies, they can never exist, especially within the idea of the assemblage. You can see the assemblage argument that makes here that the idea of the political assemblage is something that always destroys the idea of queer existence. You'll never see a trans president because that is not actually possible. The idea of having a trans president is something that's completely incomprehensible in the system, which means the Healy evidence is completely conceded. The legal notions of personhood exclude trans bodies, which is a disadd to the reason why you should vote affirmative. Then on the top of the case, this is the frame you consider that's going to lose him the entire debate. I said that there's a difference between us, a difference between your use of the idea of individuals that exist as such, but also in my use of the individual that exists as an effective mode, which means that this is a distinction between the affirmative and the negative. The reason that I get the link, the idea that he can engage in the political system is something that exists as individual links to our Colbrook evidence. So I'm going to need enough of that link that it means that he uses the state in some sort of way because the way in which the effectual idea of the state works. And then on the Warren 13 evidence. He just extends a bunch of arguments while we need to understand things. For example, the idea of queer bodies to adopt a static identity you're abstracting, but he's conceded that the abstraction is uniquely necessary in this instance of the alternative to queer and violence of queer bodies are rational. You cannot grow out outside of material understandings. The Warren evidence indicates that the overkill of queer bodies is something that does not exist as something that's material. Instead, it's something that is entirely abstraction because it is incoherent. There's no reason that in queer individuals, for example, you stab 43 times, but it happens. And the reason that happens is because something you cannot actually comprehend, that kind of effective rage that happens when those instances are something that are not comprehensible material understandings. He's conceded far too much on the case. He's also not doing enough work on Fernando, which you should at least, even if he gives new answers in 2AR, you should give me at least a risk of credence in the fact that it's completely conceded on a roll of the ballot level, which should function as at least a pre-fiat reason under the permutation.
So it's going to be overview AC. Or overview KAC.
Or should I flow the overview?
You can flow it on the K. I mean, you don't necessarily have to flow it. Okay.
Sorry.
So, overview KAC. There are three central questions in this debate: whether or not I use a state, whether or not black bodies can engage in the methodology of decay, and whether or not I meet the role of the ballot. So first, go the first contention. I definitely do not use the state. He's conceding so much, framing the act on this question. He only extends reasons why I exist in the effectual realm of the state, but that is the exact thing I'm saying doesn't happen. The jurors exist as non-beings in the world of the affirmative. They are unintelligible. The nullification is a part of the state they cannot control. It's in the Vertical 15 evidence. This is really good here. It's saying that the state nullification is not part of the state. It doesn't even exist in the same realm of the state. It is a subversion of the state mechanism, because the state cannot control it, and the jurors are not seen as static identities of jurors, who they are. He's essentializing what it means to be a juror and who juries are. He assumes that everyone on a jury is a specific being who identifies as a specific class, but does not mean the jurors have to identify as these specific beings. Jurors can also be used as a metaphor. Not doing enough work on this. The metaphorical use of the jury is nullification. The metaphorical nullification just gives the affect of rejecting the state. There is no specific reason why I use only material juries. This definitely solves that for all the link level. He's not saying any reason why we cannot reform the state. So go to the good evidence. The good 15 evidence is really good. This is a key framing issue in the debate about who actually helps trans bodies. He's conceding literally all the arguments I made that the alternative does not do anything to solve. That he's conceding that people still go to jail in the world of the NC. The Conto evidence really good here. That he simply waits around and does absolutely nothing. He says, oh, we should wait for the system to expand, but that is incomprehensible. He understands that he wants it to be unclear, but the point is that if people are trapped inside the ontology of the criminal system that prevents them from ever accessing any of the methods of decay, that was the turn I made. The person is ontological, that you can no longer become or have any sort of identity that exists as irrational. The system sees you as a rational being and conforms you to simply a black prisoner. You are no longer exist outside of that realm at all. So he says it's just a way. He only makes defensive arguments to the good evidence, saying that, oh, well, the state might eventually overturn reforms and rights are not accessible. But I'm not saying the rights are accessible to everyone. I'm saying that the affirmative is the only person in this round who contextualizes what it means to actually help the trans youths and queer youths that are trapped in the government right now. This is really clear. People are trapped in ontologies right now, which prevents them from accessing the actual alternative of decay. Nobody can become a suicide bomber if you are locked in prison. That means we have to have some methodology, which is the AC, prior reconception of what the justice system is, and a way to free the people who would be trapped inside this ontology is a prior question to decay. Also means that function is the roll of the ballot level. Extend the first perm. All the perms solve back for the inclusion of the roll of the ballot. I already responded to this. So the affirmative links to the roll of the ballot. He's saying that we simply can't do it because it folds in the AC, but this doesn't respond to the perm double bind. That if it's such a bad thing, if the AC is such a bad thing, it means it couldn't solve for any of the residual links implicit in the status quo. The AC doesn't uniquely do anything to increase the state. It simply says during nullification is a good thing. So if you buy this argument, it means that the perm literally cannot solve anything. So grant me the perm. English is not responding to the perm. Jurors can do jurors will simply adopt the mindset of the K, which means it's a net benefit. He cannot, no black body can engage in the K either, because he's not doing enough work on the massive 14 evidence. It's not necessarily he is ignoring queer bodies because they cannot become anything besides what whiteness wants them to be. They simply can't abdicate from this. I see Curry 3D analysis really good here that we can't ignore that. Good job.
you mind if I walk around? Or?
Good.
said the ballot's ready. Yeah.
I'm very good at eye contact.
Decision's still going, right?
Yeah. I'm almost done. You can come in here if you want.
Is Westlake still going to Badgerland next weekend? Wisconsin?
I will not be, perhaps. Some of the kids on our team will. We just have a lot of novices this year, so we're trying to send them to as many tournaments as possible so they can get like experience.
There's a card that the 1AR cross applies. I heard Colin 09.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, can I see that?
D-Wang.
Mm-hmm.
It's not D. Your younger brother, Evan?
Well, he's technically my twin. I guess we don't know who's older.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He just started. Everyone thinks he's my younger brother because he started debating a year after I did.
Oh, okay.
So his freshman year was, or his novice year was last year, which is ludicrously impressive considering how good he is.
So is he a senior this year?
No, we're both juniors.
Oh, you're both juniors.
Are you a senior?
I'm a junior.
Yeah.
I walked by someone who made direct eye contact with me, and then they looked at Fiance, and they go, "Why does everyone at this tournament look way older than us?" I got this 20 times. I know, I thought I was a reporter. But it's crazy.
this was a good debate. I was glad because I didn't get to judge a ton of high caliber debates this tournament. I ended up voting neg. I think that the 2AR is way too defensive is the main problem. I thought your overview was very good, and I thought, well, in the form of it and the style. But if you take a look at, I mean, each individual piece of what you say that your 2AR is going to prove is not offensive. The first one is, I am going to disprove that I use the state. Second, I'm going to prove that I can engage the method of the K. Third, I'll prove I meet the role of the ballot. And it's like, none of those things is going to be a winner for you in this debate. The confessional role of ballot, I think, is problematic because the alternative, kind of analytically meets the role of the ballot. And this is not something that the neg really says, but it is kind of cheaty because the role of ballot says, queer unintelligibility is something we should endorse, and that's what the alternative is. So it's going to be hard for you to meet the role of the ballot on those grounds. I don't end up saying, oh, roll the ballot is everything, so I'm not going to give you, offense or something like that, because I think the neg would have to do some more develop. I kind of default to a more modest stance in these types of debates, especially when the neg is also making arguments that don't seem to directly impact that role of the ballot. But that's it serves some function, and the main thing is that it's defense against the AF answer of, well, what do we do with trans youth who are in prison now, who are going to prison? These are kind of material effects, because it makes me have some pause when I think of whether that has an impact in this debate, and whether that actually links to the role of the ballot. I end up thinking that the neg wins a bunch of different link arguments. The first one is this subjectivity rights argument, and the AF's response is kind of, I'm not in the state, so I'm not like the state-based conception of rights, but I don't think he has to win that, because he says that the AF's conception of subjectivity in the individual's power to nullify is a link, and I think that's the extension of the Kohlberg evidence. He says it forecloses non-being, negativity, other possibilities of being that are not contained within the individual's power to nullify. And then there's also a risk of a link here that you are not properly, assuming or properly endorsing an assemblage theory when you forward an argument that individuals have this power to nullify. I think you can be consistent with it, but that's not an argument that's made by the AF. And then there's another argument that even if you are not the state, that we understand the power to nullify as happening within the state, and that gains coherence through places of state power and within an assemblage of statecraft. And I don't know how the AF spin or gloss on the AF of a metaphor resolves any of these link arguments. I think it was interesting, but I don't know that it really deals with these arguments in particular. Oh, there's another link argument. No, there are two more. One is the link to the 1AR arguments about black identity. He says that this would exclude the black queer identity. It's too rigid, and it denies that bodies are messy. And I don't have a response to that in the 2AR, and I think that's an additional link argument. I think it was pretty good for the neg to do that. I actually think the 2NR should have spent more time on the cards that are read in the 1AR. I thought they could have granted much better links for you than the AF, and I think you should have made a big deal of that, been like, oh, you shouldn't have read these cards, this is bad for you, here's 2, 3 more link arguments, and been very explicit about that, instead of just being like, my number 2 is a DA to the AF. Just be like, you have now defended a conception of identity that the K criticizes. That's unfortunate. Like, he tried to get out of this in cross-ex, but then actually read arguments that probably link in the 1AR. And then, actually, that is the last link argument. So I think that you link, and given that there's not a lot of alt debate, I think I can vote that the alt solves the impacts and solves the majority of the case, so if you link, it's going to be bad for you. I don't think you get a perm because you drop this Fernando evidence and don't deal with that in the 2AR at all. He says there's an encoding DA, you're like trying to combine bodies, I don't know. He says it's dropped in, it's offense against the perm, and I'm not going to get into it too much. There's no response to it in the 2AR. There's also, I don't think there's a big net benefit to the AF over the alternative alone, because you've also conceded alt-solves case arguments on the AF. For instance, he says that if there's an instance of a queer person who's stabbed 43 times, the neg offers a theory that can explain these interactions, which means that it can solve the root cause of the AF. I don't think that that you really have argument for why the alternative can't solve the AF. I think you make arguments that, oh, what do you do about sending kids to jail? But he has made a separate claim that, well, we wouldn't need jail or incarceration in the first place, which is, not super well explained, but it's something that I don't think the AF answers very explicitly. I think that the cross-application of Collins, Chobani, and 9 can probably deal with this, but it's just not expanded upon. I think the argument in that card, that we shouldn't have to wait, immediacy is important, can definitely answer this argument and be a real tiebreaker for the AF. But I still have to think that the AF is better both at solving its own impacts and at solving the impacts to the K. But I just don't think that there's enough justification for why the metaphor of jury nullification is good to meet intelligibility. I think maybe nullification in a very literal sense can solve the literal impacts you're going for against the alts. And maybe this is part of the problem with AF strategy, is that you're trying to kind of straddle two different things. And you say, you kind of catch yourself in the 1AR when you're responding to the first link. You're like, but the metaphor of jury nullification, or you could conceive of it literally. And I'm like, well, which do I do? Because when you answer the alt, you want to be like, literally, there are kids that the AF will help. Right. But then when you answer the links, you want to be like, no, it's a metaphor. It's not really the state. It's not, and I think maybe there's a nuanced way to dance about it, and we could think a little harder about that. But the easiest way would just be like, pick a side. Either you want to be super material and answer. I mean, he's impact turned abstraction in this debate, and so you need to answer that if you're going to go for these arguments like material is the only thing that matters. And I think a lot of the cards in the AF are very much set up to do this, so I think that is probably the way to go. Don't go for this metaphor type stuff. For some very much the line in cross-X that you should just beat down is, what do you do for X person? What does the alt do? What does it look like? And, just really appeal to that and be like, Bob, come on, like, what the heck is this crap? And sometimes you can worry about looking unsophisticated, pursuing a strategy like that, but I think that you have the pieces in the AF to make it work.
Okay.
Then I think that's actually all I have. Do y'all have any specific questions?
So how does the AF resolve the question of assemblage theory? I guess maybe that was just a question of me not really understanding what assemblage theory was in context of the AF.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the AF has to be inconsistent. It's weird though when you say, you have to be careful when you make a 1AR argument that like the black is not unable to become you. That's when you're denying I think the assemblage arguments, because you're saying that there are these kind of static categories that cannot be explained by assemblages. I think the AF can be consistent though. You can be like, there are individual jurors who, I'm not claiming anything universal about their subject position or their identity or anything. And you do that, you're like, oh, he's essentializing, not me. But then when you also make, I think these arguments in the 1AR are problematic. So you can just say, look, the AF is a very particular claim about one thing that would be good. And I have not said anything about, are jurors a category of being that can do X thing that is universally good? And, I think that's decent link defense.
Okay.
But really it was the explanation of identity in the 1AR that was the problem there. And then you can see this link argument that's like jury nullification inherently is a reification of subjectivity and rights in a legal space.
Okay. Did you disclose speaks?
Yeah, sure. It was 29-3, 29-2.
Cool. Thanks.
Yep. Good luck, y'all. What are your records?
5-2. 6-1.
Nice.
Good luck for this tournament.
You too.
Thanks, Bob.
Yep.